Hello, and welcome to the Daily Dose of Lore. I'm so glad you found your way here, because tonight, we're going to slip through the veils of time and step into Middle-earth, a realm woven from starlight, ancient songs, and memories older than the world itself. But before we begin our journey, if these calm, curious explorations help you unwind, consider leaving a like and subscribing. For now, though, let yourself settle in. Close your eyes if you wish. Take a slow, deep breath. Let's begin. Middle-earth began with a song. Not metaphorically, but literally. Before mountains rose and seas formed, before the first light ever shone, the world was sung into existence by the Ainur, angelic beings of pure thought and music. They stood in the void and sang together, their voices weaving harmonies so complex that each note contained the potential for entire mountain ranges, for flowing rivers, for the wind itself. Melkor, who would become Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, tried to corrupt this song, weaving in his own themes of cold and chaos. But even his discord became part of the greater music, adding tension and depth to creation. When the song ended, the vision of the world hung before them like a dream, and then Ilúvatar, the One, made it real. Every tree, every stone, every creature that ever lived in Middle-earth is an echo of that original song, still resonating after countless ages. The world remembers the music, and if you listen very carefully on a quiet night, perhaps you can almost hear it still, humming beneath the surface of everything. Before the sun and moon existed, the world was lit by two trees. Not ordinary trees, but living sources of light that grew in the undying lands. Telperion, the elder, had leaves of dark green that shone with a silver light, and from its branches dripped a dew like liquid starlight. Lothlórien, the younger, bore leaves of pale green that gleamed with golden radiance, and golden rain fell softly from its flowers. These trees did not shine constantly. They waxed and waned in a 12-hour cycle, one reaching its brightest light as the other faded, creating an eternal twilight hour when both trees glowed together and Valinor shimmered in combined silver and gold. The elves who dwelt there never knew darkness in those days. They walked beneath branches of living light, and time moved differently in that radiance, slower and sweeter than anywhere else in the world. But nothing gold or silver can stay. Morgoth and the great spider Ungoliant came in the night. They poisoned the trees, drained their light, and left them standing dead and dark. From their final flower and final fruit, the sun and moon were made. But the original light, the light before dawn, was lost forever, preserved only in the Silmarils. The stars you see at night are older than the sun. Long before the first sunrise, Varda, queen of the Valar, took silver dew from the two trees and flung it across the dark sky, making stars. She crafted them with purpose, not randomly, but in patterns and constellations that told stories, that carried meaning. The elves awoke under these stars, and the first thing they ever saw was starlight on water. This is why elves love the stars above all things, why they sing to them and name them and remember them even after thousands of years. When you look up at the night sky, you are seeing the same light that shone on the first elves when they opened their eyes for the very first time. The stars have not changed. They have been watching, patient and constant, through every war and every peace, every rise and every fall, for more than 30,000 years. They remember everything, and they will be there long after the last story is told. The Valar are not gods exactly, though they might seem like it to mortals. they are more like archangels, the 14 most powerful of the Ainur who entered the world after it was made to shape it and guide it. Each has a domain. Manwi rules the winds and skies, Ulmo the waters, Aule the earth and stone, Yavanna all growing things. They are not omnipotent. They can be wounded, can grow weary, can even be deceived. Beneath them are the Maiar, lesser Ainur, who serve them. Gandalf is a Maya, so is Saruman, so was Sauron before he fell. The Balrogs were Maiar corrupted by Morgoth in the ancient days. These beings walked the earth in the Elder Days, visible and powerful. But as ages passed, they withdrew, becoming more distant, more subtle. By the Third Age, they work mostly in secret, guiding rather than commanding, whispering rather than shouting. The world is given to the children of Ilúvatar now, to elves and men. The Valar watch from afar, and intervene only when the need is dire beyond measure. Before Sauron, before Morgoth, there was Melkor. He was the mightiest of all the Ainur, possessing a portion of the power of every other Vala. In the beginning, he was not evil, but pride grew in his heart. He desired to create things of his own, not merely to shape what Ilúvatar had made. When he could not find the flame imperishable, the secret fire that gives true life, his frustration turned to resentment. He began to corrupt the music, introducing themes of discord. When the world was made, he entered it first and claimed it as his own. He broke mountains, raised new ones, made the lands unquiet. The other Valar came, and there was war even before the children of Ilúvatar awoke. Melkor was cast down and chained for 3 ages, but when he was released he returned to evil, stealing the Silmarils and earning the name Morgoth, the Black Foe. In the end, it took all the valor and the host of the West to bring him down. Even Sauron at his height was only a shadow of what Morgoth had been. The first darkness, the deepest darkness, came from the mightiest light. Under the stars beside the waters of Cuiviénen, the Elves awoke. Not born, not made, but awoke as if from sleep, complete and conscious. The first sound they heard was water moving over stones. The first sight was starlight reflected on its surface. They had no childhood, no parents to teach them. They simply were, suddenly, fully aware and filled with wonder. They began to make language immediately, naming everything they saw: water, stone, star, tree. They sang before they spoke in sentences. This is why the elven tongues are so beautiful, so musical, because they were invented by people experiencing the world for the very first time, by minds untouched by sorrow or fear or death. Morgoth found them before the Valar did. He sent spirits to watch them, to capture some and twist them in his dungeons. Some say this is how orcs were made, though Tolkien himself was never certain of their origin. Eventually, the Valar learned of the Elves and invited them to come west to Valinor where they would be protected. Some went. Some refused, preferring to stay in Middle-earth under the stars they loved. This was the first sundering of the Elves, the beginning of their divisions into different kindreds, and it shaped everything that came after. 3 jewels, each no larger than a fist, contained the light of the 2 trees before they died. The Silmarils were crafted by Fëanor, greatest of all elven smiths, and they were so beautiful that looking upon them could fill even the darkest heart with joy and longing. They glowed with their own light captured from the trees and held within crystal. Varda herself blessed them so that no mortal or evil hand could touch them without being burned. Fëanor loved them beyond reason. When Morgoth stole them, he swore a terrible oath that he and his sons would never rest until they reclaimed the jewels, and they would slay anyone, friend or foe, who kept them. Because Morgoth stole them, wars raged across Middle-earth for 6,000 years. Because Feanor swore that oath, he led the Noldor elves away from paradise into certain doom. Because his sons inherited that oath, they attacked their own kin and burned ships and destroyed kingdoms. One Silmaril ended up in the sky as the morning star, Arundel's vessel. One was cast into the sea. One was swallowed by the earth. None were ever recovered by those who made them. All of this death, all this sorrow, all these ages of darkness came from 3 small stones filled with light. Sometimes the most beautiful things carry the heaviest price. For 3,000 years, the Balrog slept beneath Moria. Empires rose and fell above it. Kingdoms were born and forgotten. Languages evolved and died while it dreamed of fire and shadow in the deep places of the world, in darkness so complete that even stone could not remember light. The dwarves who woke it had been mining for mithril, that precious silver steel, following veins deeper and deeper into the mountain's heart. Their picks broke through into its chamber, and the creature stirred. Durin, the king, fell before its flame. The dwarves fled, and Moria became silent, filled only with echoes and the distant breathing of something ancient that waited in the dark, patient as the mountains themselves, until Gandalf came at last to cast it down into deeper shadow. Khazad-dûm, which men later called Moria, was not always a place of darkness and dread. For 5,000 years it was the greatest of all dwarf kingdoms, a vast underground city carved from the living rock of the misty mountains. The dwarves dug halls so tall their ceilings vanished into shadow, carved pillars wider than ancient oak trees, made chambers that could hold thousands. They followed veins of precious metals, of gold and silver and iron, but their greatest treasure was mithril, the silver steel that was worth more than entire kingdoms. Mithril was light as silk but hard as dragon scales. A shirt of mithril rings could turn any blade. It did not tarnish or lose its luster through age. The wealth of Khazad-dûm was beyond measure. But the dwarves delved too greedily and too deep. In their hunger for mithril, they went down into places where even the Valar had never walked, into roots of the mountain where older things than dwarves had dwelt. They woke the Balrog, and everything they had built, everything they had achieved through 5 millennia of labor, was abandoned in a single generation. The halls fell silent. The forges grew cold. Khazad-dûm became Moria, the Black Pit, a place of terror that travelers avoided, where only orcs and darker things made their homes in the ruins of glory. Who is Tom Bombadil? In all of Middle-earth's long history, no one has been able to answer this question. He lives in the old forest where trees walk and time tangles in on itself. He wears a blue coat and yellow boots and speaks in singing riddles that seem like cheerful nonsense. But there is something else beneath that jolly exterior. When Frodo put on the One Ring, he vanished from sight as he always did. Tom could still see him. The ring, which bent the will of all others, had no power over Tom. He put it on his own finger and did not disappear. Some believe Tom is a nature spirit, eldest of all living things. Others think he might be a Vala in disguise. A few suggest he's something older, from before the music began. Tolkien himself said Tom was an intentional enigma, a reminder that not everything needs explanation. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to dance just beyond understanding, free and unknowable as the old forest itself. The world was not always round. Originally, it was flat, a great disk floating in the void with Valinor in the uttermost west and Middle-earth in the middle and unknown lands in the east. The sun and moon sailed on courses above and below this flat world, and if you sailed far enough west, you would eventually reach the shores of the Undying Lands. But in the Second Age, the men of Númenor, corrupted by Sauron, sailed west with a great armada to make war on the Valar themselves, seeking to claim immortality by force. Ilúvatar intervened directly, the only time in all history that he did so after the world's creation. The earth opened and swallowed the entire fleet. Númenor itself sank beneath the waves in a single night. All its people lost save those few who remained faithful, and the world was bent. It was curved into a sphere so that no mortal could sail to Valinor anymore. The straight road to the west was removed from the physical world. Only the elves still knew the way, by secret paths that existed outside the circles of the world. Men were confined to the round earth forever, able to sail around it in circles, but never to reach the blessed realm. The world lost something when it was bent, some magic or grace that could never be recovered. Immortality is not the gift it seems. Elves do not age once they reach maturity. Their bodies remain unchanged, strong and fair, for as long as the world endures. But they are bound to this world. They cannot leave it. When men die, their souls go beyond the circles of the world to a place even the Valar do not know. But elves who die are sent to the halls of Mandos, and, after a time, may be reborn into the same world they left. They come back to the same trees, the same stars, the same shores. Forever. As the ages pass, elves grow weary. They have seen every season 1,000 times. They have loved and lost and loved again. The world becomes heavy with memory. This is why, by the Third Age, so many elves chose to sail west to Valinor, leaving Middle-earth to men. Not because they were defeated, but because they were tired. Tired of watching everything they built fade and fall into ruin. Tired of living forever. Aragorn, who married Arwen, understood this in the end. He chose to lie down and die while still in strength and clarity of mind, rather than cling to life until he became a burden. In Middle-earth, mortality is called the gift of Ilúvatar. It is freedom. It is the ability to leave. In the hidden valley of Rivendell, where waterfalls sing and gardens bloom eternal, Elrond Half-Elven has dwelt for more than 6,000 years. He witnessed the War of Wrath that ended the First Age. He was present when Sauron was defeated at the end of the Second Age. He saw Isildur take the ring and refuse to destroy it. He has counseled kings and wizards. He has healed countless wounds both of body and spirit. He remembers when Rivendell was young, when Lothlórien was just being planted, when Minas Tirith was built. And yet for all his wisdom and power, he is weary. The weight of memory grows heavy. At the end of the Third Age, he knows it is time to leave. His sons departed long ago, lost to wandering. His wife sailed west centuries earlier, unable to bear the sorrow of the world any longer. Only Arwen remained, and she chose mortality to stay with Aragorn. Elrond left Middle-earth knowing he would never see his daughter again, that she would age and die while he lived forever in Valinor. It is the great tragedy of the Oer Half-Elven. Every choice carries a loss that can never be recovered. Lothlórien is a forest where time almost stands still. Not completely, but almost. Days and months still pass there, but slowly, reluctantly, the way honey drips from a spoon. The entire forest is under the protection of Galadriel, and her power, wielded through Nenya, one of the three rings, preserves everything within its borders from decay and change. The trees are malorn, unique to that forest, with smooth silver bark and leaves of gold that do not fall in winter. The Elves of Lothlórien built their homes high in these trees, platforms and houses called Telain that swayed gently in the wind. To climb up into one of these flets at evening and rest there beneath the stars while a light wind moved through golden leaves was to remember what the world was like before sorrow, before loss, before the long defeat. But Galadriel knew what she had made. She knew that the beauty of Lothlórien was not natural but preserved, that by using her ring she was holding back time itself, and that when the One Ring was destroyed, her ring would lose its power and everything she had protected would pass away. She chose to let it go. When the time came, she sailed west to Valinor, and Lothlórien faded as she had known it would. Galadriel is one of the oldest and greatest of all the elves still living in Middle-earth. She was born in Valinor before the sun first rose, before the two trees were poisoned, in the days when the world was young. She saw the light of the trees with her own eyes. She witnessed the rebellion of the Noldor and chose to leave Valinor against the will of the Valar, driven by pride and desire to carve out her own realm. For 6,000 years she lived in Middle-earth, and over time her pride transformed into wisdom. She dwelt in Lothlórien and protected it with one of the three rings, making it a place where time passed slowly and beauty endured. When Frodo offered her the One Ring, she was tempted. For a moment, she imagined what she could do with such power, how she could set right everything that was wrong, how she could preserve all that was beautiful and destroy all that was corrupt. But she refused it, recognizing that the ring would corrupt her no matter her intentions. In that refusal, she passed the test she had been facing for 6 millennia. At last, she was free to leave Middle-earth and return to Valinor, and at the end of the Third Age, she sailed west with Gandalf and Frodo, and the last of the great elves departed from the mortal lands. Númenor was a star-shaped island raised from the sea by the Valar, as a gift to the men who fought against Morgoth in the First Age. For 3,000 years, it was the greatest kingdom of men that ever existed, a realm of such power and glory that its ships sailed to every shore and its influence touched every land. The Númenóreans were not ordinary men. They were descended from those who had married elves or received elvish blessings, and they lived 3 times longer than normal men. The least of them could live 200 years. The kings lived 400 or more. They grew tall and strong and wise. They built cities of white stone and ships that could weather any storm. But as centuries passed, they grew proud. They resented that the elves were immortal while they must still die. They envied Valinor, which they could see from their western shores on clear days, shimmering on the horizon like a memory. Sauron, captured and brought to Númenor as a prisoner, used this resentment. He became an advisor to the king and slowly poisoned his mind, until at last the Númenóreans built an armada and sailed to make war on the gods themselves. Númenor sank in a single night of fire and wave. Only 9 ships escaped, led by Elendil the Faithful. These few founded the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor in Middle-earth, and from them descended Aragorn, carrying in his veins a faint echo of that ancient glory. Long before Sauron forged the One Ring, there were many rings of power. 20 in all, made by Celebrimbor, the greatest elven smith of the Second Age, with the help of a mysterious figure who called himself Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. Annatar taught the elves secret techniques, methods of binding magic into metal so that it would endure through ages. Together, they made 19 rings, 3 for elf lords, 7 for dwarf lords, 9 for men. Each ring enhanced the natural abilities of its bearer, preserving what they loved, giving them power over their domains. But Annatar was Sauron in disguise, and everything he taught the elves was designed to serve his purpose. In secret, he returned to Mount Doom and forged the One Ring, a master ring that could control all the others because he had woven his own power into every ring that Celebrimbor made. When he put on the One Ring, every bearer of the other rings felt his presence and knew they had been betrayed. The elves immediately removed their 3 rings and hid them, never wearing them while Sauron held the one. The 7 given to dwarf lords did not corrupt them as Sauron hoped, for dwarves are resistant to domination, but they kindled greed in their hearts and brought dragon fire upon them. The 9 given to men worked exactly as Sauron intended. The men who wore them became wraiths, neither living nor dead, bound to Sauron's will forever. The One Ring was not merely a tool of power, it was a piece of Sauron himself. When he forged it, he poured most of his own strength into the metal, binding his fate to it. This made him vastly more powerful while he possessed it, but it also made him vulnerable. As long as the ring existed, Sauron could not truly be destroyed. But if the ring were destroyed, Sauron would be so diminished that he could never take physical form again. The ring had a will of its own, or rather, it had Sauron's will. It wanted to return to him. It would betray its bearer at the worst possible moment, slipping from fingers, growing heavy, whispering doubts. It amplified whatever desire was strongest in the bearer's heart. For Boromir, it promised strength to save his people. For Galadriel, it whispered of power to set right all that was wrong. For Frodo, it simply grew heavier and heavier, a physical weight and a spiritual burden that crushed him slowly over months of travel until, at the very end, he could not destroy it. The terrible truth was that no one could. The ring could not be destroyed by the will of any being strong enough to carry it to the fire. In the end, it was Gollum's desperate hunger and a moment of mercy shown by Bilbo decades earlier that accomplished what no strength or will could do. On the banks of the Anduin River, beneath stars that had watched the world since its beginning, Isildur stopped to rest. His company of 200 men had been marching for days through wild lands. They were almost home, almost to safety, almost free from the shadow of Mordor. Isildur carried the One Ring on a chain around his neck, hidden beneath his armor. He had refused to destroy it at Mount Doom, claiming it as weregild for his father and brother who fell in the war. Now it whispered to him constantly, filling his thoughts with visions of power and kingship. The orcs came at dawn, emerging from the river mist like nightmares made flesh. Isildur put on the ring to escape, becoming invisible, diving into the cold water. But the ring betrayed him. It slipped from his finger deliberately, abandoning him to the arrows that found him in the shallows. His body was never recovered. The ring sank into the riverbed mud where it would wait for 2,500 years, patient and aware, until a creature called Deagol found it on a fishing trip. One moment of pride, one choice not to cast it into fire, rippled forward through millennia of consequences. The Nazgul were once men, kings and sorcerers and warriors, each of them powerful in their own time. Sauron gave them rings of power, and they accepted them gladly, not knowing the price. At first, the rings seemed to do only good. They extended life, enhanced strength, gave influence over others. But slowly, over years and decades and centuries, the men who wore them faded. They became thinner, more transparent, until finally they disappeared entirely from the world of light and dwelt only in shadow. They could not die, but neither could they live. They became wraiths, neither living nor dead, bound to Sauron's will, slaves to the One Ring. By the end of the Third Age, they had worn their 9 rings for more than 4,000 years. No trace of their original personalities remained. They were weapons, extensions of Sauron's malice, and the very sight of them caused terror in mortal hearts. They wore black robes and rode black horses and carried blades that left wounds that never healed. The Witch King, chief of the Nazgul, broke the gates of Minas Tirith with a single spell. But for all their power, they were weak in one way. They were bound to the One Ring. When it was destroyed, they unraveled like smoke on the wind, and nothing remained of them but their empty robes falling to the ground. Minas Tirith stands on the slopes of Mount Mindalluin, visible for miles across the plain of Gondor. It is built in 7 levels, each one smaller than the one below, like a white ship with 7 sails rising from the mountain. Each level is surrounded by its own wall and gate, and the gates are staggered so that no straight path leads from the bottom to the top. The Tower of Ithilien rises from the 7th level, tall and white with a banner bearing the white tree and 7 stars. From the top of this tower, you can see for 50 miles in every direction, to the mountains in the east where Mordor lies, to the river winding through fields, to the green hills in the west where Rohan begins. Minas Tirith was built 2,000 years ago as a fortress, the last defense of Gondor against the darkness in the east. For centuries it held. For centuries the men of Gondor kept watch. But by the end of the Third Age, the city was half empty. Whole streets had no one living in them. Many houses stood vacant. The population that once filled all 7 levels now barely filled 4. Gondor itself was failing, not from any single defeat, but from slow erosion, from centuries of fighting with no king, from the weight of a history too heavy to bear. Yet, when the final battle came, Minas Tirith held. The walls did not break, and when hope seemed lost entirely, the Rohirrim appeared on the horizon, and the dead walked from their mountain, and the siege was broken. Fangorn Forest is the oldest forest in Middle-earth, older than Mirkwood, older perhaps than the Elves themselves. The trees there are ancient beyond measure. Some of them remember when the world was young, when different stars hung in the sky. The forest is dim even at noon because the trees grow so tall and so close together that little light reaches the ground. Walking into Fangorn is like walking back in time. Modern things, human things, seem to fade away. Speech becomes unnecessary. Thought slows. Even urgency becomes a distant memory, because what does haste matter to trees that have stood for 10,000 years? The Ents live there, shepherds of the trees, beings that resemble old men or old trees depending on how you look at them. They move slowly, speak slowly, think slowly, because when you have lived for millennia, there is no need to rush. Treebeard, oldest of the Ents, can remember when all of Middle-earth was one great forest, before men came with axes, before the age of stone and metal began. He has forgotten more than most beings ever know. The Ents rouse themselves only twice in recorded history. Once to hunt down the orcs that had harmed their trees, and once at the end of the Third Age when Saruman turned on them. they marched to war against Isengard and tore down its walls, like children knocking over wooden blocks. Then they went back to their forest and their trees, and as far as anyone knows, they are still there, still moving slow as the roots of mountains, still tending the trees, still waiting for the Entwives who vanished in the long ago and have never been found. The Ents are shepherds of the trees, beings so ancient they were already old when the Elves first awoke. They move slowly, speak slowly, think slowly, because when you have lived for thousands of years, there is no need to rush. An Ent takes longer to say his own name than most conversations last. Each syllable a poem, each word a history. They are not trees themselves, but have grown to resemble them through ages of care and companionship. Their skin is like bark, brown and flecked with green, their hair like twigs and leaves. They can tell the story of any tree in their care. Every spring it has seen, every winter it has endured. Somewhere in the east there were once Entwives who taught trees to bear fruit and flowers, who loved gardens and ordered fields. The Ents loved the wild forest. Eventually, the Entwives left, seeking lands where they could shape and cultivate, and the Ents searched for them for centuries but never found them. Some say the Entwives perished in the wars. Some say they still live far to the east in lands no map shows. Treebeard still hopes in his slow, patient way that someday he might find them again. But it has been 3,000 years, and hope even for an Ent grows thin. Mithril is a silver metal found only in one place, the deep mines of Khazad-dûm beneath the misty mountains. It does not tarnish. It does not lose its luster through age or use. It is lighter than silk, but harder than dragon scales. A shirt made of mithril rings can turn any blade, absorb any blow, yet be worn under an ordinary shirt without anyone noticing. It feels like wearing nothing at all. In the great days of Khazad-dûm, the dwarves mined mithril and traded it to the elves who prized it above gold. Small amounts of mithril could purchase entire kingdoms, but the vein ran deep into the earth, deeper than the dwarves had ever delved, and in following it, they woke the Balrog. After Khazad-dûm fell, no more mithril was mined. The metal became rarer than all the gems of the earth combined. By the end of the Third Age, a shirt of mithril was worth more than the entire Shire. Bilbo wore such a shirt, given to him by the dwarves after the quest to the Lonely Mountain. He passed it to Frodo, and that shirt saved Frodo's life more than once on the journey to Mordor. When Aragorn became king, he searched the ruins of Moria hoping to find some small amount of mithril remaining, but the deep places were too dangerous, and whatever ore remained was lost forever in darkness. Dragons are not animals. They are not merely large reptiles with wings and fire. They are intelligent, malicious, cunning, and capable of speech. The greatest dragons could look into your mind and know your thoughts, could speak words that wormed their way into your heart and changed how you saw the world. Glaurung, the first dragon, had no wings, but was vast and powerful and filled with fire. He laid a curse on Turin and Nienor that brought them both to terrible ends. And Calagon, the Black, was so large that when he fell from the sky during the War of Wrath, he broke the peaks of mountains beneath him. Smaug, the Golden, was smaller, but perhaps more dangerous because he was clever. He could smell a lie. He could twist words. He hoarded gold not because he needed it, but because he loved the possession of things, the knowledge that others wanted what he had and could not take it from him. All dragons loved treasure with an obsessive, corrupting love. they would lie on piles of gold for centuries, never spending it, never using it, simply possessing it, and being possessed by it in turn. When Smaug was slain, the gold of Erebor was freed, but it brought no happiness to anyone. Men quarreled over it. Dwarves grew greedy. It caused war and division just as surely as the Silmarils had, because there is something in great treasures that corrupts the heart. In the depths of Mirkwood lives a creature older and darker than most things that walk or crawl. Shelob is her name, though she has no use for names herself. She is a spider, but not a spider. She is vast, bloated with thousands of years of feeding, her body the size of a small house and her legs like tree trunks. She is the last child of Ungoliant, the great spider who helped Morgoth poison the two trees, and she inherited her mother's endless hunger and malice. She dwells in tunnels beneath the pass into Mordor, and nothing that enters her lair comes out alive. She catches them in webs stronger than iron chains. She injects them with poison that does not kill but paralyzes, leaving them conscious and aware while she feeds slowly over days. Gollum knew about her. He led Frodo and Sam there deliberately, planning to let Shelob have them so he could take the ring. She wrapped Frodo in webs and stung him, and only Sam's desperate courage drove her off. Even then, she did not die. She crawled back into her lair to heal, and for all anyone knows, she is still there, still hungering, still waiting. Some evils are too old and too deep to be fully destroyed. The Palantiri are not simple crystal balls. They are living consciousness bound into stone, created in the deeps of time by elven craftsmen whose skill has never been matched. Each stone sees in all directions simultaneously, recording everything it perceives into a memory that never fades. Look into a Palantir, and you can see across vast distances, witness events as they happen in real time, communicate with someone holding another stone thousands of miles away. But the stones are not passive. They have a will of their own. They show what they choose to show, not necessarily what you wish to see. A strong will can command them, but a stronger will can intercept that command. This is how Sauron turned them into weapons. He possessed the stone in Barad-dûr and waited for others to look into their Palantiri. Then he showed them visions designed to break their hope, to make them despair. Denethor, steward of Gondor, looked into his stone and saw only Sauron's might, Sauron's armies, Sauron's inevitable victory. The stone did not lie, but it did not show him everything. It did not show him Frodo approaching Mount Doom, or Aragorn gathering an army, or the eagles flying to Mordor. Denethor saw only what Sauron wanted him to see, and it drove him to despair. Sometimes the most dangerous deception is a truth told incompletely. The dead men of Dun Harrow were once living men who swore an oath to Isildur 3,000 years ago, promising to fight for him against Sauron. But when the time came, they were afraid and broke their oath. Isildur cursed them, declaring they would never rest until they fulfilled their oath. They haunted the mountain for 3 millennia, neither living nor dead, unable to leave, unable to rest, waiting for the heir of Isildur to call upon them. When Aragorn came and revealed himself as the rightful king, they followed him because at last their chance had come. They swept through Gondor like a gray wind, and every enemy who saw them fled in terror, because you cannot fight the dead. After the battle, Aragorn released them from their oath, and they passed on at last, finally free. This was mercy. Aragorn could have kept them bound to him. He could have used them as an invincible army. but he released them instead, because an oath fulfilled deserves release, and even the dead deserve peace eventually. The Shire is a green and pleasant land in the north of Middle-earth, a place of rolling hills and winding rivers and small farms. Hobbits have lived there for more than 1,400 years, long enough to forget that they came from somewhere else, long enough to think of the Shire as if it had always been. They keep careful records of family trees and land boundaries, but care nothing for the wider world. Most hobbits live their entire lives without traveling more than 20 miles from home. They love food and drink and comfort and peace. They are not warriors. They have no use for adventures. And yet, twice in a single lifetime, a hobbit saved the world. Bilbo found the One Ring and chose to spare Gollum, an act of mercy that made everything else possible. Frodo carried that same ring to Mount Doom, and at the very end, when his will failed, it was another hobbit, Sam, who carried him when he could no longer walk. The great kings and wizards and elven lords could not do what the hobbits did. Perhaps this is because hobbits are too small to think they matter much. They do not grasp for power or glory. They simply endure, putting one foot in front of the other, keeping their promises, holding to what is good even when everything around them is dark. Gandalf said that hobbits are amazing creatures. You can learn all there is to know about their ways in a month, and yet, after 100 years, they can still surprise you. Lembas is a bread made by the Elves, a way bread that can sustain a traveler for days with only a single bite. It is wrapped in malorn leaves and given to those who journey far from the safety of elven lands. Lembas tastes different to everyone who eats it, like a memory of something beloved, something warm and safe and long ago. For Sam, it tasted like strawberries in summer. For Frodo, in his darkest moments, it was the only thing he could stomach. Eating it felt like rest, like a brief respite from weariness and sorrow. The Elves made it with a special process that was never revealed to outsiders, and they would only give it to those they trusted. Orcs could not eat it. It burned them. Even Gollum could not bear its taste. There was something in it that rejected corruption, that pushed back against the darkness. As long as Sam and Frodo had lembas, they had strength to continue. When it ran out near the end of their journey, they struggled on through willpower alone. No ordinary bread could have carried them as far. It was a gift of the Elves, given freely, that made the impossible merely unbearable. In the depths of the dead marshes lie the corpses of men and elves and orcs who fell in the great battle fought there 3,000 years ago. But the bodies have not decayed. They lie preserved beneath the water, faces pale and hair floating like weeds, their eyes still open. Sometimes lights flicker over the marshes at night, corpse candles that lead the travelers astray into the bogs where they drown. Gollum led Frodo and Sam through the marshes on the way to Mordor, warning them not to follow the lights, not to look at the faces in the water. Sam looked anyway and saw dead men staring up at him, their mouths open as if still calling for help. He nearly fell in. Frodo pulled him back. The dead marshes are growing, slowly but steadily, spreading outward year by year. Eventually, they will swallow all the plain where the battle was fought, and no one will remember what happened there except the dead who lie beneath the water, forever watching, forever waiting, caught between life and death in murky water that preserves but does not grant peace. Gandalf is not a man. He is a Maya, an angelic spirit who took the form of an old man to walk among the peoples of Middle-earth. His true name is Lothlórien. He lived in Valinor in the Undying Lands for thousands of years before the Valar sent him west to oppose Sauron. He was sent with 4 others, Saruman the White, Radagast the Brown, and 2 blue wizards whose names are not recorded. They were forbidden to match power with power, forbidden to dominate the free peoples, instructed only to counsel and inspire. Gandalf alone kept to this purpose. He wandered Middle-earth for 2,000 years, usually alone, sometimes weary, often doubted. He befriended hobbits because he saw in them something the great and mighty had lost: innocence, goodness that did not depend on strength. When he fell fighting the Balrog in Moria, he was sent back because his task was not complete. He returned as Gandalf the White, more powerful, more direct, but even then he worked through others, never commanding, only guiding. After the ring was destroyed and Sauron defeated, Gandalf's task was finished. He sailed west to Valinor with the Elves, leaving Middle-earth to men and hobbits and the Age of Mortals. The last magic departed with him. The eagles of Middle-earth are not animals. They are intelligent beings, capable of speech, with wills and purposes of their own. They live in the mountains and keep mostly to themselves, involving themselves in the affairs of other races only when they choose. Gandalf befriended them long ago, and they have helped him several times, but they are not servants or taxis. They have their own reasons for helping, and their own reasons for refusing. They cannot simply fly the ring to Mordor, because the skies over that land are patrolled by the Nazgul on fell beasts, and an eagle would be seen from miles away. They came only at the very end, when the ring was already destroyed and Sauron fallen, when it was safe to approach the ruin of Mount Doom. They saved Frodo and Sam from the lava and carried them to safety, and it was the greatest service they could have offered. Some people think the eagles should have done more, but this misunderstands their nature. They are not tools to be used. They are free beings who make their own choices, and the help they give is a gift, not an obligation. Saruman the White was once the chief of the wizards, the most learned, the most powerful. He studied the lore of the rings obsessively, searching for ways to understand Sauron's work, believing that only by comprehending evil could he defeat it. But in studying the enemy, he began to admire the enemy. He began to think that Sauron's goals were inevitable, that the age of elves and wizards was ending, that the only sensible course was to ally with power while there was still time to claim a position in the new order. He fortified Isengard and bred his own army of orcs, trying to create his own realm, his own power base. He grew jealous of Gandalf, whom he had always considered inferior. When Gandalf was sent back as Gandalf the White after his death, Saruman realized he had been supplanted, and his pride could not bear it. He turned fully to cruelty then, destroying the forests around Isengard for fuel for his war machines, enslaving men, sending armies against Rohan. In the end, he was defeated not by heroes, but by trees, by the Ents who tore down his fortress and left him trapped in his tower. He was offered mercy repeatedly and refused it every time. He died at last in the Shire, stabbed by his own servant Wormtongue, reduced from a mighty wizard to a petty tyrant bullying hobbits. His body dissolved into mist and blew away on the wind, and nothing remained of him but stories of what he had been and what he became. The Rohirrim are horsemen, riders of the plains of Rohan, and their bond with horses goes deeper than training or skill. They can understand the speech of horses, or at least the intent behind it, and their horses respond to them with uncanny intelligence. The Miaras, the greatest horses of Rohan, will allow no one to ride them except those they choose. Shadowfax, chief of the Miaras, chose Gandalf, and none could match him for speed or endurance. The Rohirrim descend from the Eotheod, a people who lived far to the north until 500 years ago, when they migrated south and were given the plains of Rohan by Gondor, in thanks for their aid in war. They have kept their own customs and language, speaking Rohirric among themselves, though they also know Westron. They braid their hair and wear mail and fight with spear and bow from horseback. Their kings are buried in great mounds outside Edoras, each king beneath his own hill, with poems singing of their deeds. When the mounds stand together in lines, you can see the history of Rohan traced in earth and grass, generation by generation, back to the first king who claimed those lands. They are a young people compared to the Dunedain of Gondor, but they are fierce and proud, and they remember their oaths. When Gondor called for aid, the Rohirrim came, riding for 5 days and nights to reach Minas Tirith in time, and their arrival turned the tide of the battle. The doors of Durin stood at the western entrance to Moria, wrought by the elf Celebrimbor and the dwarf Narvi, working together in an age when their peoples were still friends. The doors were invisible when closed, seamless with the stone around them. They would only appear when the moon shone upon them, revealing silver lines that formed an arch and stars, and a tree and letters in Elvish script. The inscription read, "Speak, friend, and enter." It was a riddle, but also a password. The word for friend in Elvish is melon, and when that word was spoken aloud, the doors would swing silently open. Gandalf stood before those doors for hours, trying to remember the password, trying various spells and incantations, growing frustrated. Finally, Merry asked what the writing said, and when Gandalf translated it, he realized his mistake. It was not a spell, it was just a password. Say the word friend and the doors open. It was a greeting, a welcome, a sign of the trust between elves and dwarves in the days when Moria was still Khazad Dûm. By the time the Fellowship stood there, that friendship was ancient history, almost forgotten. The doors were the last remnant of it, still waiting for someone to speak the word that meant everything had once been different. The language of the elves is not arbitrary. Every word in Quenya and Sindarin was crafted with intention, with purpose, with beauty. Tolkien spent decades creating these languages before he ever wrote the stories, and they are as real as any tongue spoken by humans. Quenya is the High Elven tongue, based on Finnish, flowing and full of vowels, the language of song and poetry and ancient lore. Sindarin is the Grey Elven tongue, based on Welsh, the daily language of most elves in Middle-earth by the end of the Third Age. The elves do not just speak these languages, they sing them. Elvish names mean something specific. Aragorn means revered king. Legolas means green leaf. Galadriel means maiden crowned with radiant garland. When an elf gives something a name, that name carries weight. It describes the essence of the thing, not just its surface. This is why the black speech of Mordor sounds so harsh to elven ears. It is a language designed by Sauron to be the opposite of Elvish, deliberately ugly, deliberately corrupting. To speak it is painful for good beings. The inscription on the One Ring is in black speech, and when Gandalf speaks it aloud at the Council of Elrond, the whole room grows darker and colder, and everyone present feels a shadow pass over them. Language in Middle-earth is never neutral. It carries the nature of its speakers within it. The Shire was not always safe. It felt safe to the hobbits who lived there, but that safety was bought with the vigilance of others. For more than 1,000 years, the Rangers of the North patrolled the borders of the Shire in secret, turning away threats, dealing with dangers before they could reach Hobbit lands. The hobbits never knew. They thought the world was safe because nothing bad ever seemed to happen, never realizing that bad things were kept away by grim men walking lonely roads in all weathers, going hungry and cold and unrewarded. Aragorn was one of these rangers. He spent 80 years of his life protecting people who did not know he existed, who would have been suspicious of him if they had met him, who thought of rangers as dangerous vagabonds. After he became king, he officially declared the Shire a protected territory, forbidding anyone to enter without the hobbits' permission. The hobbits believed this was just a formality, something written on paper. They did not understand that it was a continuation of the protection they had always had, made official at last, a reward for Frodo and Sam and all they had done. The Shire remained at peace for many generations after, a small green place where simple joys could flourish, purchased by the sacrifices of those who guarded it from outside. The dwarves were not made by Ilúvatar. They were created by Aule the smith, one of the Valar, who grew impatient waiting for the children of Ilúvatar to awaken. He wanted students to teach his craft, beings who would love stone and metal, and making things as much as he did. So in secret, he made 7 dwarf fathers, each the ancestor of one of the 7 clans of dwarves. But when Ilúvatar discovered what Aule had done, he was not angry. He granted the dwarves true life and consciousness, but he made Aule put them to sleep until after the elves had awakened, so that the firstborn would indeed be first. This is why dwarves are different from elves and men. They were not part of the original music. They were adopted into it, given souls and fates by the grace of Ilúvatar. When dwarves die, they go to the halls of Mandos like the elves, but they wait apart in separate chambers, and what happens to them after the end of the world, no one knows. Some say Aule will wake them again to help rebuild the world, but this is only hope and rumor, not knowledge. The 7 fathers of the dwarves each founded a clan, and each clan made their home in different mountain ranges across Middle-earth. Durin the Deathless was the eldest and greatest. He awoke alone on Mount Gundabad and wandered south until he came to a great mountain beneath which lay a natural cave system of incredible size. There he founded Khazad-dûm, and his people delved and built for 5,000 years. The other 6 fathers are less well known. Their names were rarely spoken outside their own clans, and their histories were kept secret in the manner of dwarves. But all dwarves trace their ancestry back to one of the 7, and clan loyalty runs deep in dwarvish culture. A dwarf knows every name in his lineage back to the founding father, and can recite his genealogy like a song. This is why dwarves value family so highly, why they remember grudges and debts across generations, why they will travel across the world to honor an oath made by an ancestor centuries ago. Memory and lineage are everything to them. Khuzdul, the secret language of the dwarves, is never taught to outsiders. Even the closest friends of dwarves, even those who have fought beside them and saved their lives, will never hear the true tongue spoken. Dwarves use Khuzdul only among themselves, in their own halls behind closed doors. When they speak to outsiders, they use Westron, or whatever language is common in the region. The few Khuzdul words that outsiders know are names of places or a handful of phrases that have leaked out over millennia. But the grammar, the deep vocabulary, The songs and poetry of Khuzdul remain locked away, passed from dwarf to dwarf in absolute secrecy. This is not hostility, it is protection. The dwarves learned early that giving away their language meant giving away power over them, giving enemies the ability to curse them or command them in their own tongue. So they guard Khuzdul as jealously as they guard their most precious gems. It is the last thing that belongs to them alone, that cannot be stolen or corrupted. Erebor, the lonely mountain, stood alone on the eastern edge of Mirkwood, visible for miles across the plains. Inside its halls, the dwarves of Durin's line had built a kingdom second only to Khazad Dûm in its glory. They mined gems from the mountain's heart, crafted works of incredible beauty, and accumulated wealth beyond measure. The greatest treasure of all was the Arkenstone, a gem that shone with its own light, white and rainbow-hued, more beautiful than anything else in their treasury. But their wealth attracted the attention of Smaug, a dragon from the northern wastes. He came in fire and destroyed the nearby human town of Dale, then drove the dwarves from their mountain and claimed all their gold as his hoard. For nearly 200 years, Smaug lay on that treasure, sleeping on gold and gems, while the dwarves wandered in exile. Thorin Oakenshield, heir of Durin's line, gathered a company to reclaim Erebor, and with the help of a hobbit named Bilbo, they succeeded. Smaug was slain, the mountain was retaken, and the dwarves returned to their ancient home. But the dragon's horde caused strife. Men and elves and dwarves nearly went to war over its division, and only the arrival of a greater enemy forced them to unite. Treasure, even when reclaimed from a dragon, still carries the dragon's curse. It makes friends into enemies and kindles greed in the hearts of the good. The Arkenstone was found in the deepest mines of Erebor, a single perfect gem unlike any other. It was clear as water, but filled with light, white light that shifted and changed as you moved it, casting rainbows across any surface nearby. The dwarves called it the heart of the mountain, and they treasured it above all their other wealth. It became the symbol of kingship for Durin's line. The rightful king of Erebor was the one who held the Arkenstone. When Smaug took the mountain, the Arkenstone was buried in his hoard, lost among coins and cups and crowns. Bilbo found it during his infiltration of the dragon's lair and kept it secret. Later, he used it to try to prevent war, giving it to Bard and the Elves as a bargaining chip to negotiate with Thorin. This act of betrayal, as Thorin saw it, nearly broke the company apart. But in the end, after the Battle of Five Armies, after Thorin died and was buried with honor, the Arkenstone was placed on his chest in his tomb. It was buried with him deep in the mountain, returned to the stone from which it came, and no one has seen it since. The heart of the mountain beats no more in the halls of the living, but rests with the dead in darkness, a treasure that belongs now only to memory. In the old forest near the Shire, the trees are not quite trees, or rather they are trees, but they are also awake, aware, capable of movement, and even malice. Old Man Willow is the most dangerous of them, a great willow tree that grows beside the Withywindle River. He can make the air around him drowsy and heavy. Travelers who rest beneath his boughs find themselves growing sleepy, then dozing, then slipping into a deep slumber from which they may never wake. Old Man Willow can crack open his trunk and draw sleepers inside, trapping them in his wood, absorbing them slowly over days and weeks. He nearly caught Merry and Pippin this way. Tom Bombadil came and commanded the tree to release them, and the willow obeyed, though reluctantly. The trees of the old forest remember when all the land was forest, when men had not yet come with axes and fire. They resent the clearing of the forest, resent the farms and roads and villages that have replaced their kind, and a few of them, like Old Man Willow, have turned their resentment into active hostility. They wait for travelers to enter their domain, and then they strike. Weathertop, which the Elves call Amon Sul, stands on a hill in the wildlands between the Shire and Rivendell. Once there was a great watchtower here, built by the men of Arnor to keep watch over the roads. It had a palantir, one of the seeing stones, and from this height one could see for miles in every direction. But Arnor fell, the tower was destroyed in war, and now only ruins remain. Yet the hilltop is still a place of power, a place where the boundaries between the seen and unseen worlds grow thin. This is where the Nazgul caught up with Frodo and his companions. This is where the Witch King stabbed Frodo with a Morgul blade, driving a shard of cursed metal into his shoulder that would have turned him into a wraith if Elrond had not healed him. Even centuries after the tower fell, Weathertop remains a place of significance, a high, lonely place where great deeds and terrible deeds have both been done. The stone of its foundation is stained with old battles, and those who camp there often dream troubling dreams, as if the hill remembers what has happened upon it and whispers those memories to anyone who will listen. At the very end of the Third Age, Frodo could not stay in Middle-earth any longer. The wounds he received from the Morgul blade and the burden of carrying the ring had damaged him too deeply. He would never fully heal while he remained in the mortal lands. So the Elves offered him passage on their ships, a rare gift for a mortal. Permission to sail west to Valinor, where he might find rest. Sam came to the Grey Havens to see him off, and Frodo tried to explain why he had to leave. It was not a rejection of the Shire or of his friends. It was simply that he had been too hurt, had seen too much darkness, carried too much weight. He needed a place where those wounds could heal, and Middle-earth no longer had such places. The Elves were leaving. The magic was fading. The age of mortals was beginning, and Frodo no longer quite belonged to it. He sailed west with Gandalf and Bilbo and Galadriel and Elrond, the last ship of the Keepers of the Rings, leaving Middle-earth to Sam and Aragorn and the people who would build the Fourth Age. Sam watched the ship until it was just a speck on the horizon, and then he turned and rowed home to the Shire, carrying in his heart both grief and gladness, because that is what it means to love deeply and to let go. The Fourth Age began not with fanfare, but with quiet rebuilding. Aragorn married Arwen and became king of the reunited kingdom, joining Gondor and Arnor together for the first time in 3,000 years. He ruled wisely and well for 120 years, long by the standards of ordinary men, though short for one of his bloodline. The Shire flourished. The trees of Gondor bloomed again. Trade roads were reopened. Old alliances were renewed. But it was a different world than before. The elves were gone. The wizards were gone. The great magic had faded. What remained was the world of men, a world of mortal lives and mortal choices, where each generation would have to find its own way without the guidance of beings who remembered the elder days. Gimli and Legolas remained friends to the end. When at last Legolas felt the call of the sea and could no longer resist it, he built a ship and sailed west, and he took Gimli with him. It was the first and only time a dwarf had ever been allowed into Valinor. a grace granted for the friendship between an elf and a dwarf that transcended the old grudges of their peoples. Sam, after Rosie died, also was given permission to sail west, being a ring-bearer himself. He passed the Red Book to his daughter Eleanor, said goodbye to his children, and took ship. Middle-earth belonged fully to mortals then, to people who would make their own history, write their own songs, and carry forward into the ages to come whatever they chose to remember of the days that were. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, carried many names and walked many roads. He was strider to the hobbits of Bree, Thorongil to the men of Gondor, Estel to the elves who raised him in Rivendell. He was the heir of Isildur, the last in a line that stretched back 3,000 years to the kings of Númenor. But for most of his life he was a ranger, walking the wild lands, fighting enemies in secret, protecting people who never knew his name. He spent 30 years in the service of Rohan and Gondor, fighting under assumed names, winning battles that others took credit for, never claiming his heritage. He waited because he knew that a king must prove himself worthy through deeds, not merely through blood. When at last he revealed himself and claimed the throne, no one could deny that he had earned it. He had fought beside common soldiers. He had healed the sick. He had risked his life 1,000 times for people who owed him nothing. And when he became king, he ruled not as a distant lord, but as someone who understood the lives of ordinary people, who had walked their roads and shared their dangers. His reign was called the beginning of the New Age, but Aragorn never forgot the old ways. He honored the elves who were leaving, protected the Shire that had given him hobbits for companions, and when his time came, he chose to die rather than cling to life as Denethor had done. He lay down in the House of Kings and passed quietly, and Arwen remained beside him until the end. Arwen Undomio, daughter of Elrond, was the most beautiful of all the elves remaining in Middle-earth by the end of the Third Age. She had the choice that all half-elven must make, to be counted among elves and live forever, or to be counted among men and die. For thousands of years she lived as an elf, dwelling in Rivendell and Lothlórien, expecting to sail west when the time came. But then she met Aragorn, and everything changed. She chose mortality, chose to bind her fate to his, to live a human lifespan and die a human death. Her father could not change her mind, though it broke his heart. When she made her choice, Elrond knew he would leave Middle-earth and never see his daughter again. She would remain behind, would age and die, while he lived forever in Valinor without her. After Aragorn died, Arwen went to Lothlórien, to the place where she and Aragorn had first pledged their love. The forest was empty now, faded, the golden trees turning green and ordinary. She lay down on Cairn Amroth and died there, choosing the time and place of her death as was the right of the Númenorian line. She was buried beside Aragorn in Minas Tirith, and above their tomb was written, "Here lies Aragorn son of Arathorn, king of Gondor, and Arwen Evenstar, his queen, who chose mortality for love, and found in that choice both joy and sorrow, as is the way of all things in Middle-earth. Magic in Middle-earth is not spells or sorcery in the way most fantasy presents it. It is more like art, like craft elevated to its highest expression, like the making of beautiful things that endure beyond the maker's life. The elves build with magic woven into every stone. The dwarves carve doors that respond to passwords. The wizards work subtle influences on hearts and minds, guiding rather than commanding. True magic changes reality gently, like water shaping stone over centuries, not with loud explosions or theatrical effects. Gandalf uses magic sparingly, a light in darkness, a voice that carries authority, a staff that can bar a door or break a bridge. He does not throw fireballs or summon lightning except in the most dire necessity. The ring itself works subtly, whispering, tempting, making you believe that what you want and what it wants are the same thing. By the end of the Third Age, even this subtle magic is fading. The songs no longer reshape the world. The stones no longer respond to old words. The forests no longer wake. What remains is the world of ordinary things, ordinary people, ordinary choices, and perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps the greatest magic is simply the courage to continue when all the old certainties have faded, when you must make your own light in the darkness. The Council of Elrond brought together representatives of all the free peoples of Middle-earth for the first time in centuries. Elves from Rivendell and Mirkwood and Lothlórien, Dwarves from the Lonely Mountain and the Iron Hills, men from Gondor and the North, Hobbits from the Shire, and Gandalf, who had walked among all of them. They came to Rivendell not knowing what they would face, and there they learned the truth about the ring. Each brought news of their own troubles, orcs multiplying in the mountains, evil stirring in Mirkwood, the Shire threatened by black riders. And slowly they realized that all these troubles had a single source. The ring must be destroyed, or all would fall to darkness. But who could do it? Not the great and powerful, not the wise. The task fell to a hobbit, the smallest and least likely of all who were gathered there, and 8 others pledged to go with him, not because they were the mightiest warriors or the wisest counselors, but because they represented the free peoples, united at last against a common enemy. The Fellowship of the Ring was not chosen by fate or prophecy. It came together through choice, through individuals deciding to stand together against the darkness. And though the Fellowship broke, though its members were scattered, the choices they made together changed everything. The breaking of the Fellowship happened at Aim Hen, the Hill of Sight, when Boromir tried to take the ring from Frodo. Boromir was a good man, brave and strong and loyal to his city. But the ring found the weakness in his heart, his desperate desire to save Gondor, his belief that he could use the ring as a weapon against Sauron. He hunted Frodo through the woods, demanding the ring, and only Frodo's decision to put on the ring and flee saved him. Boromir came to his senses immediately after, horrified at what he had done. He died shortly after defending Merry and Pippin from orcs, fighting until he was shot through with arrows, blowing his horn in defiance until the very end. Aragorn found him dying, and Boromir confessed his failure, asking for forgiveness. Aragorn granted it without hesitation, but Boromir died believing he had betrayed his companions. He was given a hero's funeral, sent down the river in an elven boat with his weapons and his horn, a funeral fit for a prince of Gondor. The lesson of Boromir is not that he was weak, but that anyone can be tempted. The ring finds what you love most and promises to give it to you. The only safety is to refuse the promise entirely, to understand that some powers are too dangerous to use no matter how dire the need. Sam Gamgee was a gardener from the Shire who never meant to go on any adventure. He was caught eavesdropping on a conversation about the ring, and Gandalf made him go with Frodo as punishment and protection both. Sam had never been further than a few miles from home. He had never seen elves or mountains or the sea, and yet he walked all the way to Mordor and back, carrying Frodo when Frodo could no longer walk, fighting off Shelob when she attacked, refusing to abandon his master even when all hope seemed lost. At the very end, when Frodo succumbed to the ring on the slopes of Mount Doom, it was Sam who urged him forward, who stayed by his side, who watched as Gollum fell with the ring into the fire. After everything was over, after the eagles carried them to safety and they were honored as heroes, Sam went home to the Shire and lived there for decades. He married Rosie Cotton, raised children, and served as mayor for 7 terms. He replanted the party tree and used Galadriel's gift of earth to make the Shire bloom more beautifully than ever before. He lived a quiet, ordinary life, which was exactly what he had always wanted. But when Rosie died, Sam was called west. He was a ring-bearer, brief though it was, and he was granted the same grace as Frodo. He sailed across the sea and was reunited with his friend at last, and there the story ends. The gardener who saved the world went home to his garden, and when his work was done, he found peace. Gollum was not always a monster. He was born Sméagol, a creature of the river folk, something like a hobbit but not quite the same. On his birthday, his friend Déagol found a golden ring in the river while fishing. The moment Sméagol saw it, he wanted it. He wanted it so badly that he killed Déagol to take it, strangling his best friend with his bare hands for a ring he had seen 5 minutes before. He took it and hid it and treasured it, and the ring began to work on him. It extended his life far beyond natural span, but it also twisted him. He grew to hate the sun, to love darkness and raw fish, to speak to himself in hisses and whispers. His family drove him out, and he fled to caves beneath the misty mountains, where he lived for 500 years alone with his precious. The ring abandoned him eventually, wanting to be found, and Bilbo stumbled across it in the dark. Gollum hunted for it for 60 years, eventually tracking it to the Shire, then following the Fellowship, always watching, always waiting. In the end, it was Gollum who destroyed the ring, though not intentionally. He bit it off Frodo's finger and fell with it into the fires of Mount Doom, dying with the thing he loved most clasped in his hand. Gandalf said that Gollum still had a part to play, and he was right. The pity of Bilbo and Frodo, who spared him when they could have killed him, was ultimately what saved the world. Even the most wretched creature may have a purpose, if you can find the mercy to let them live. The paths of the dead led under the White Mountains, through caverns where no living man had walked for thousands of years. The entrance was a dark door in the mountainside, and above it was written a warning: "The way is shut. It was made by those who are dead, and the dead keep it. The way is shut." But Aragorn took that path anyway, because he needed an army, and the only army that would answer his call was the army of the dead, the Oathbreakers who had haunted the mountain for 3 millennia. He walked into darkness with only Legolas and Gimli and a handful of rangers, and the dead came at them, whispering, threatening, trying to drive them mad with fear. But Aragorn did not falter. He commanded them as the heir of Isildur, and they followed because they had no choice. They followed him through darkness, through passages that had not seen light since the world was young, and they emerged at last in Gondor. There, Aragorn used them to break the siege of Minas Tirith, and then he released them. The oath was fulfilled. The curse was lifted. The dead could finally rest. Walking the paths of the dead was one of the bravest things Aragorn ever did, because he walked through fear and darkness with nothing but his own will and his claim to kingship, trusting that it would be enough. And it was. Helm's Deep is a fortress built into a mountain, a place of refuge for the people of Rohan when danger threatens. It consists of the Hornburg, a keep built around a tower, and the Deeping Wall, a massive rampart that stretches across the mouth of the valley. Behind the wall is a deep gorge and the glittering caves, natural caverns of extraordinary beauty that Gimli explored and fell in love with. Helm's Deep was built in ancient times by men of Númenor, and it had never fallen to any enemy. When Saruman's army of 10,000 orcs and wild men marched against Rohan, the people retreated to Helm's Deep and prepared for siege. The battle lasted all night. The orcs brought explosives and blew a hole in the wall. They poured through the breach and nearly overwhelmed the defenders. King Theoden and Aragorn made a last desperate charge at dawn, riding out to meet the enemy, expecting to die but determined to die fighting. And then Gandalf arrived with reinforcements, and the riders of Rohan charged down the hillside into the orcs, and the enemy broke and fled into a forest that had not been there the night before. The trees had come, the Huorns sent by Treebeard, and they did not let the orcs escape. Helm's Deep held as it had always held, and Saruman's army was destroyed. The Battle of Pelennor Fields was the greatest battle of the War of the Ring. The armies of Mordor, led by the Witch King of Angmar, laid siege to Minas Tirith, and it seemed the city would fall. But then horns sounded in the north. The Rohirrim had come, 6,000 riders led by King Theoden. They charged down onto the field at dawn, and for a time it seemed they might prevail. But then the Witch King killed Theoden, and darkness threatened to return. It was Éowyn, Theoden's niece, who faced the Witch King. She had disguised herself as a man to ride to war, unable to bear being left behind. The Witch King said no living man could kill him, a prophecy he believed made him invincible. But Éowyn was not a man. With the help of Merry, who drove a blade into the Witch King from behind, Éowyn struck the final blow, and the Lord of the Nazgul fell. It was the turning point of the battle. The enemy wavered. Aragorn arrived with reinforcements from the south. The siege was broken. Gondor was saved. And a woman who had been told to stay home and wait had changed the course of history by refusing to accept that there was nothing she could do. The mines of Moria extended far deeper than the Fellowship realized when they entered. They walked through the upper levels, through halls that were beautiful once but had fallen into decay. They found the Chamber of Mazarbul, where Balin and his company had tried to re-establish a dwarvish presence 30 years earlier. They found the Book of Mazarbul, a record of the colony's final days, written in increasingly desperate handwriting as supplies ran out and orcs closed in. The last entry simply read, "We cannot get out, the end comes. Drums, drums in the deep, they are coming." The Fellowship was attacked in that chamber by orcs and a cave troll, and they fled deeper into the mines, across the bridge of Khazad-dûm, a narrow span of stone over a chasm so deep its bottom could not be seen. There, Gandalf faced the Balrog, and they both fell into darkness, falling for an age, fighting as they fell, until they hit water far below, and the fight continued. Moria had been empty of dwarves for 1,000 years, empty of any light or life except orcs and worse things. It was a tomb, a memorial to what hubris could cost. The dwarves had dug too deep, and what they found destroyed everything they had built. Mount Doom is not a natural volcano. It was raised by Sauron in the Second Age, shaped by his power to be the furnace where he would forge the One Ring. The cracks of Doom, where the ring was made, are the only place where the ring can be destroyed. This is because the ring is bound to the fire that forged it. only by casting it back into that same fire can its power be unmade. The mountain stands in the heart of Mordor, always burning, always smoking, its peak visible for miles. Lava flows down its sides. The air around it shimmers with heat. To approach it is to walk through a wasteland of ash and poisoned rock, where nothing grows and nothing lives. Frodo and Sam crossed this wasteland in the final stages of their journey, crawling when they could no longer walk, carrying no food, with only a few drops of water left. They reached the cracks of doom at last, but Frodo could not destroy the ring. At the very edge of the fire, he claimed it for himself. It took Gollum's attack and his fall to complete the task. When the ring was destroyed, Mount Doom erupted. Sauron's power had been poured into the mountain, and without the ring to sustain it, the mountain began to collapse. The ground shook. Lava poured out. The entire realm of Mordor began to crumble. Frodo and Sam would have died there if the eagles had not come. Mordor is a land of ash and fire, bounded by two mountain ranges, the Ephel-Duath to the west and the Irid Lithui to the north. Between these mountains lies a plateau, and in the northwest corner of this plateau stands Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, Sauron's fortress. The only entry into Mordor is through the Black Gate, the Morannon, a massive gate set in the mountains guarded by towers and armies. Inside Mordor, the land is desolate. Nothing grows. The air is thick with smoke and ash. Great slave camps sprawl across the plain where orcs work in mines and forges, making weapons and armor for Sauron's armies. The Mountain of Fire dominates the landscape, its peak glowing red at night, its smoke visible for hundreds of miles. Frodo and Sam did not enter through the Black Gate. They went through the pass at Cirith Ungol, climbing a stair cut into the mountains, passing through Shelob's lair, entering Mordor from the west. Once inside, they discarded their gear, dressed as orcs, and walked across the plain toward Mount Doom, just two small figures in a vast wasteland. No one expected them. No one was watching for hobbits. All of Sauron's attention was turned outward, toward his armies and his enemies. He never imagined that someone would try to destroy the ring, and that blindness was his downfall. Sauron was not always a Dark Lord. In the beginning, he was Myron, a Maya of Aule the Smith, skilled in crafts and making things. He admired Melkor's strength and joined him in the First Age, becoming Morgoth's chief lieutenant. After Morgoth was cast into the void, Sauron remained in Middle-earth, repented briefly, then returned to his old ways. In the Second Age, he took a fair form and called himself Anatar, teaching the elves how to make rings of power while secretly forging the One Ring to control them all. When his deception was revealed, he went to war, and in that war he was captured by the Númenóreans and brought as a prisoner to their island. But he corrupted them from within, turning them against the Valar, bringing about Númenor's destruction. His fair form was destroyed in the drowning of Númenor. After that, he could only take shapes of terror, and his true form became a shadow with a burning eye. By the end of the Third Age, Sauron had no body at all. He was spirit-bound to the ring. His consciousness spread across Mordor, focused in Barad-dûr. The eye of Sauron on top of the Dark Tower was not metaphorical. It was real, a manifestation of his will, searching constantly for the ring. When the ring was destroyed, Sauron was not killed. He cannot be killed. But he was diminished to such a degree that he became powerless, a shadow of malice in the east, unable to take form or threaten the world again. The Grey Havens are the last port in Middle-earth, from which one can sail to Valinor. They are located on the Gulf of Lune in the west, where the river meets the sea. The Elves built these havens thousands of years ago as the final refuge before their departure. The ships that sail from there are elven ships, gray with white sails, and they follow the straight road, a path that exists outside the circles of the world. After Númenor fell and the world was bent, mortal ships could no longer reach Valinor. They would sail west and eventually come back east, going around the sphere of the world endlessly. But the elven ships know the old way, the straight path that leads beyond the world, to the undying lands. Hírdan, the shipwright, has lived at the Grey Havens since the First Age, building ships and sending elves west. He is one of the oldest beings still in Middle-earth, old even when the elves first awoke. He gave Gandalf one of the 3 rings when the wizard arrived from the west, recognizing that Gandalf would need it for the trials ahead. At the end of the Third Age, Círdan watched as the last of the great elves departed. Galadriel, Elrond, Gandalf, and the ring-bearers Bilbo and Frodo. He sent them with his blessing, knowing that soon he too would sail, and then the Grey Havens would stand empty, and the age of the elves would be over. The Red Book of Westmarch is the book in which this entire history is recorded. Bilbo began it, writing down the story of his adventure to the Lonely Mountain. He called it, There and Back Again, a Hobbit's Holiday. Frodo continued it, adding the account of the War of the Ring and the quest to destroy the One Ring. He called his additions The Downfall of the Lord of the Rings and the Return of the King. Sam added to it after Frodo left, recording what happened in the Shire after the Scouring and the final departure of the Ring-bearers. The book was copied many times, and the copies diverged, with different scribes adding notes and appendices and genealogies. Tolkien presents his work as a translation of the Red Book, as if he found an ancient manuscript and rendered it into English for modern readers. This framing gives Middle-earth a weight of reality, a sense that it is not invented but discovered, that somewhere these events truly happened and were recorded by those who witnessed them. The Red Book is kept in the Shire, passed down through Sam's family, a treasure more valuable than any gold, because it contains the memory of everything that mattered. The Scouring of the Shire happened after the ring was destroyed, after Sauron was defeated, when the hobbits returned home expecting peace. They found the Shire occupied by ruffians, led by Sharky, who turned out to be Saruman. He had fled there after his defeat, seeking revenge by ruining the one place the hobbits loved most. He cut down trees, tore up gardens, imposed harsh rules, and turned the Shire into a mockery of what it had been. But the hobbits who returned were not the same hobbits who had left. Merry and Pippin had fought in battles. Sam had faced Shelob. Frodo had carried the ring to Mount Doom. They organized the hobbits, led a resistance, drove out the ruffians, and confronted Saruman. He tried to stab Frodo, but Frodo's mithril shirt saved him. Wormtongue, Saruman's servant, finally snapped and killed Saruman, and was then killed in turn. The Shire was freed, but it had been damaged. Sam used Galadriel's gift of earth from Lothlórien to heal the land, replanting trees, restoring gardens. Within a year, the Shire bloomed more beautifully than it ever had before. The Scouring of the Shire teaches that evil can reach even the safest places, but also that those places can be healed, that courage and community can restore what was lost. Gondor, in its prime, was the greatest kingdom of men in Middle-earth, founded by Elendil and his sons after the fall of Númenor. At its height, it controlled vast territories, with Minas Tirith as its capital and Minas Ithil as its sister city. The kings of Gondor were descendants of Númenor, living 200 years or more, tall and wise and powerful. They kept watch over Mordor, preventing Sauron from regaining strength. But after 2,000 years, the line of kings failed. The last king went to war and did not return, and no one knew if he was dead or lost. His son never claimed the throne, and Gondor came to be ruled by stewards, hereditary regents who governed in the absence of the king. For 1,000 years, the stewards waited for a king who did not come, and Gondor slowly declined. The population dwindled. The borders shrank. Enemy forces pressed closer. By the time of the War of the Ring, Gondor was a shadow of what it had been, holding on through sheer stubbornness and pride. But when Aragorn revealed himself and claimed the throne, Gondor was renewed. The line of kings was restored. The decline was reversed. Gondor entered a new age, and for a time at least it shone again as it had in the elder days. Arnor was the sister kingdom of Gondor, founded in the north by Elendil himself. While Gondor watched the south, Arnor watched the north and west. For 1,000 years it flourished, but then it was divided among Elendil's heirs into 3 smaller kingdoms, Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rudor. These kingdoms weakened each other with petty wars and jealousy, and when the Witch King of Angmar arose in the north, they could not stand against him. One by one, the kingdoms fell. Cardolan was destroyed. Rudor was corrupted and conquered. Arthedain held out the longest, but eventually it too was overrun. The survivors fled south or into the wild, becoming the Rangers of the North, nomadic warriors with no kingdom but still loyal to the line of kings. For 1,000 years they wandered, protecting the lands they once ruled, keeping watch over the Shire and other settlements, unknown and unrewarded. Aragorn was one of these rangers, the last heir of Isildur, the last remnant of the Northern Kingdom. When he became king, he reunited Arnor and Gondor, restoring the kingdom that had been divided for 3,000 years. The North was brought back under the rule of law, the Rangers could finally rest, and the line of Elendil was made whole again. The concept of eucatastrophe is central to Tolkien's philosophy. It means a sudden, joyous turn in events, a grace that comes when all seems lost. It is not a deus ex machina, not an arbitrary intervention, but the result of choices made long before, small acts of mercy and courage that ripple forward and change everything. Bilbo sparing Gollum in the dark. Frodo showing mercy to Gollum when Sam wanted to kill him. Faramir releasing Frodo and Sam when he could have taken them prisoner. Gandalf choosing hobbits for the quest. Tom Bombadil saving the hobbits in the Old Forest. Each of these small acts contributed to the final victory in ways no one could have predicted. The eagles arriving at Mount Doom. The army of the dead fulfilling their oath. The Ents rising against Saruman. These are eucatastrophes, sudden turns toward hope. Tolkien believed that true stories reflect the deepest truth of reality, that mercy and grace exist, that darkness does not have the final word, that even when all seems lost, there is still the possibility of dawn. The eucatastrophe is not a promise that everything will work out. It is a reminder that there is always hope, even in the darkest hour, if we have the courage to choose goodness over despair. The small acts matter most in the end. Bilbo's mercy, Sam's loyalty, Frodo's burden, Merry and Pippin's courage, Eowyn's refusal to accept her assigned role, Faramir's wisdom, Theoden's willingness to ride to Gondor's aid even when his own kingdom was threatened. These are not great acts of magic or displays of power. They are simply people choosing to do what is right, what is kind, what is brave, even when it costs them everything. Gandalf tells Frodo that even the wise cannot see all ends, that many who live deserve death and many who die deserve life. But we cannot give it to them. All we can decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. This is the heart of Middle-earth's morality. We do not control outcomes, only choices. We cannot see the future or guarantee success. We can only choose, moment by moment, to be merciful or cruel, brave or cowardly, faithful or false. And those choices matter. They echo forward in ways we cannot predict. The gardener who walks into Mordor to help his friend. The king who gives up his army of the dead because it is the right thing to do. The wizard who befriends hobbits because he sees good in them. These choices, more than any magic or power, are what save the world. The nature of evil in Middle-earth is important to understand. Evil is not a creative force. It cannot make, only corrupt. Morgoth could not create the orcs from nothing. He had to twist living beings into monsters. Sauron could not make a ring of power without help from Celebrimbor. He had to corrupt the good work of another. Evil in Tolkien's world is always derivative, always parasitic. It imitates and corrupts but cannot originate. This is why the ring cannot be used for good. It is a tool of domination, and even if you intend to use it for good purposes, the act of using it will corrupt you. Gandalf refuses the ring. Galadriel refuses the ring. Aragorn never even considers taking it. They understand that the ring is evil in its essence, that its power is inseparable from its corruption. The only way to defeat the ring is to destroy it, to refuse its promise entirely, to understand that some powers are too dangerous to exist no matter who wields them. This is a radical moral stance, that there are some tools which cannot be used ethically, some methods which taint the goal no matter how noble that goal may be. The gift of mortality is one of the strangest concepts in Tolkien's mythology. Elves see death as a terrible thing, a loss that can never be recovered. They pity men for their brief lives, their inability to see the full flowering of their works. But men are given something elves do not have: the ability to leave the world entirely, to go beyond the circles of the world to a place even the Valar do not know. Elves are bound to the world until its end, doomed to watch everything they love fade and die while they endure forever. Men can leave. They are not bound to the world's fate. Ilúvatar gave them this gift, this freedom, and it is meant to be a grace. But men, seeing the elves live forever, envy their immortality and see their own death as a curse. This envy is what Sauron used to corrupt Númenor, promising them that they could live forever if they would only take it by force. The truth, as Tolkien saw it, is that mortality is not a curse but a blessing. It frees us from the prison of endless time. It gives our choices urgency and meaning. A life that must end is more precious than a life that goes on forever. The elves understand this by the end. This is why so many of them choose to leave Middle-earth, why they do not cling to their immortality but release it willingly. They have learned what men knew from the beginning, that there is grace in endings, that not all gifts come wrapped in joy, and that sometimes the deepest blessing looks like loss. The elves of the great journey did not all walk the same path. When the summons to Valinor was given, the Eldar set out from Cuiviane in 3 hosts, guided by Orome, and the long road west shaped their fates. The Vanyar came first to the sea, and loved the light most. They would rarely return to Middle-earth. The Noldor followed. drawn to craft and lore, storing the light in memory and in works of the hand. The Teleri were the last and the largest, lingering by lakes and rivers, and many of them never left. Those who turned back became the Nandor, wood elves who loved green valleys and the soft speech of flowing water. Others paused along the shores until Ulmo taught them the music of waves, and from these mariners came the singers of Alqualonda, and later the Grey Elves of Beleriand, under Thingol and Melian. In the end, the same starlit call produced different answers, and those answers became peoples with distinct tongues, customs, and memories. When you walk through any elven wood in Middle-earth, you are hearing the echo of a choice made beside a far-off lake under an ancient sky. The road west was one road, but the footsteps upon it moved to many quiet heartbeats. Valinor was not merely a distant land, but a harmony given shape, a realm where time moved, to gentler rhythms under the guardianship of the Valar. In its eastern reaches lay the Calateria, the Pass of Light, where the radiance of the two trees once spilled like dawn across the sea, calling wanderers from far coasts. There, the Teleri built Tirion upon Tuna's sister haven, Alqualonda, a swan harbor of white stone and curved quays, its lamps glimmering like moonlight on water. Further inland stood the green slopes of Ezelohar, where the trees had grown, and beyond rose the Pelori, mountains so high their snows never melted. After the darkening, even as the trees withered, the memory of their mingled hour lingered in the air and in the eyes of those who had seen it. To dwell in Valinor was to live among preserved songs, the scent of Yavanna's orchards, the sound of Aula's forges, the wind over to Nikatil, where Manwë watched the world. Yet even there, longing could take root, for hearts made for making and exploring will always reach toward a horizon. Paradise in Tolkien's world is tender and bright, but it does not forbid desire. It simply asks that desire be weighed with wisdom. The halls of Mandos are not a place of punishment so much as a place of waiting, a shore where the tide of life recedes and those who have left the world listen for what comes next. The elves who die go there and, after a time of reflection, may be rehoused and return to Valinor, their memories softened where grief was sharp. Mortals do not remain. Their road runs onward to a destination even the Valar cannot name, a quiet mystery that the elves both envy and fear. In the halls themselves, it is said the voices of lament are also the beginnings of healing songs, and that Mandos, stern though he is, keeps each story intact, so that nothing lived is wholly lost. In later ages, when burdens grew heavy, some elves longed for that restful pause, not as escape, but as a chance to set down weariness and begin again. It is a gentle thought hidden inside a stern lore, that endings can be mended, that time can hold a space for sorrow to become understanding. You can feel that wisdom in the way elvish music moves, turning grief like a stone in the hand until its edges smooth. Feanor, whose skill gave the world the Silmarils, did not shape only jewels. He also devised the Tengwar, a flowing script that could be adapted to many tongues, allowing sound and meaning to dwell together with grace. The curves of his letters follow the path of breath and tongue, and their arrangement is not arbitrary. Related sounds stand in families, and the signs change with a logic that makes learning feel like listening. Later, the Noldor carried this writing back into Middle-earth, and it spread wherever their craft and counsel were welcomed. You can still see it traced on doors, woven into banners, and inscribed upon blades that remember ancient oaths. The beauty of the letters is not merely decoration. In Tolkien's world, script is a craft that preserves truth with humility. Even when pride led Fëanor astray, the gift of his letters remained a quiet mercy to those who needed to set their histories down. When a scholar in Minas Tirith presses quill to parchment to copy a lay of the First Age, the motion is a small redemption, a way in which the restless fire of a brilliant mind continues to warm the world without burning it. Beren and Lúthien's story sits like a lantern at the very heart of the First Age, a tale that the elves sing when they need to remember that love can walk where armies cannot. Beren, a mortal wanderer bearing more loss than wealth, came upon Lúthien dancing in the moonlight of Nel Dorith, and in that moment two fates entwined that should never have touched. Together they did what kings had failed to do. They entered Angband in disguise, faced the shadow on its own throne, and took a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown. The price was high, and sorrow threaded its way through their days, yet even death could not untie their bond. Lúthien chose mortality for Beren's sake, and her song before Mandos was so beautiful that a doom was changed, once and only once in all the long history of the world. The elves remember this not to deny the weight of law, but to acknowledge that mercy sometimes rises like dawn over iron rules. When Aragorn speaks of Lúthien to Arwen under fading trees, he is not starting a new story, but walking in the soft footprints of an older one, where love becomes a bridge across the unknown. Arundel's voyage stitched the sundered shores together with a single, steadfast line. Born of both elf and man, he took ship upon the last hope of the West with the Silmaril upon his brow, crossing seas no mortal chart could hold. The world at that time still remembered its flatness, and the shadow of Morgoth lay heavy across its air, yet his keel found the hidden west, and his plea for pity and aid was heard. After the War of Wrath, when he was set to sail the firmament, the Silmaril became a star to be a comfort to those who looked up from battlefields and quiet fields alike. Mariners know it as Gil Estel, the star of high hope, and in the tales of men it is the morning and evening herald, a familiar light in unfamiliar skies. In peaceful seasons the star is simply lovely, but in times of doubt it becomes a reminder. Somewhere beyond the circle of your troubles shines a patient beacon kindled by courage and upheld by grace. You can feel that reassurance in the way Tolkien writes of starlight touching water. The shimmer is never only light. It is a promise born on a tide. The speech of Middle-earth is itself a map of wanderings and meetings. Westron, the common speech, grew from Adunaic, the tongue of Númenor, softened by centuries among the Dúnedain, and then shaped by trade roads and tavern talk until it could carry both high council and hobbit gossip without strain. The elves kept their own languages beside it. Kenya held for lore and ceremony, Sindarin worn like a beloved, Cloak in daily life, each sound a step in old dances. Dwarves guarded Khuzdul, their secret tongue, while using the common speech beyond their gates. Even orc talk had a rough consistency, a harsh echo of command passed down from darker masters. When characters move between languages in the tale, the change is seldom noted outright, yet the air of their words shifts. A blessing in Quenya feels like the hush after snowfall. A Rohirric vow carries the rhythm of hooves over grass. Language is not only a tool in these stories, it is a kind of weather, shaping the mood of moments and telling you softly who a people have been. Listening closely, you can hear journeys traced in the corners of vowels and the weight of consonants. Ent draughts are not wine and not water, but something that tastes like both orchard and spring, a strength brewed slowly under leaves. In Treebeard's care, Merry and Pippin drank more than once from those cool green cups, and in the months that followed, they stood taller than any hobbits recorded since the Shire began. The draughts did not make them different in the heart. They made them more themselves, as if their frames had stretched to fit the courage they had already shown. The elves would say such things are not made but grown, gathered from roots that remember rains before men spoke. The Ents would add, in their unhurried way, that haste is an overpraised virtue and that true nourishment takes time. In a world where many powers dominate and diminish, the Ent draughts are a quiet counterpoint, a gift that increases capacity without bending the will, that strengthens without binding. When the two friends walk home beneath hedgerows that now feel smaller, it is not only their height that has changed. Perspective has widened. Paths have lengthened. The cup in Fangorn lingers in their bones like a gentle bell tone, still sounding after the last sip is gone. The blue wizards crossed the sea alongside their brethren, and then their road turned east into lands that the Red Book scarcely names. In some of Tolkien's later notes, they are called Alatar and Palando, and their work, far from the eyes of Gondor and the Shire, was to hinder Sauron's servants in distant realms where new shadows gathered. What exactly they accomplished is left in careful vagueness, a margin note in the great manuscript of events, and it is perhaps fitting that their influence is suggested rather than described. Not every guard stands upon a city wall. Some watch crossroads where no heralds ride, and their victories are counted in dangers that never quite come to be. The tale's humility about the blue wizards is a gentle lesson folded into the larger story. That many labors are unknown and yet essential, that the scales of great outcomes are often tipped by unseen pebbles. When you hear of triumphs in the West, you can imagine faint ripples arriving from very far off, set in motion by quiet hands, turned by winds with no names in languages you do not speak. The sea longing is a soft ache that awakens when elven ears first hear the crying of gulls. Legolas knew it not at the beginning, loving deep woods and the rustle of green light, but after his steps reached the coasts of Gondor, the sound entered him and would not be stilled. It is not sorrow exactly, nor simple homesickness. The elves call it the call of the West, a memory in the marrow that reminds them the world has another shore beyond the mortal curve. Those who feel it can still love Middle-earth truly, can still fight and heal and sing beneath its stars. Yet a part of their attention is forever turned toward the line where sky meets water. It is a gentle pull that does not command, like a tide that rises patiently through the years. When Legolas at last built his ship and invited Gimli aboard, it was not a flight from duties, but a fulfillment of them. Friendships can become bridges strong enough to carry a dwarf into a grace never granted before. The sea longing is not a theft of joy, it is a completion of a circle, and in that completion there is both sweetness and a quiet farewell. Kingsfoil, which the Dunedain call Athelas, grows in ways that do not boast. You find it near old stones, in places where the past rests lightly upon the present, its scent opening the chest and clearing the mind like a window lifted in a spring room. In lesser hands it is a simple herb, restorative and pleasant, but under the touch of the rightful king its virtue wakes, and it becomes a balm not only for the body but for the spirit wearied by shadow. When Aragorn tended the wounded after the siege, the fragrance moved through sick rooms like remembered sunlight, and those who breathed it felt warmth return to places that had long been cold. This is not spell work in the loud sense. It is the meeting of right steward and right tool, of lineage and leaf, a harmony that allows a small thing to do a great kindness. Athalas teaches the same lesson as so many quiet elements in these histories, that humility does not mean ineffectiveness, and that under the gentlest green can rest a strength of surprising depth. The Barrow Downs roll like sleeping whales beneath a pale sky, and the grass there hides doors into older seasons. Long before hobbits tilled fields nearby, the men of Cardolan raised mounds for their fallen, and when Angmar's cold will reached south, darker presences took those resting places for their own. The wights that keep the barrows now are not the honored dead, but intrusive spirits, knitting terror out of silence, weaving chill out of memory. When the hobbits were caught, the ancient blade laid across their throats was not meant for them, but for wars that had burned out 1,000 years before. Tom Bombadil's voice broke those threads, and sunlight returned like breath to a room that had been closed too long. In the Barrow's story, you can feel how places remember, and how remembering unguarded can turn to a kind of fever. Yet you can also feel how a song can cleanse a space, how naming and laughter and a simple meal on a green hill can restore balance. The Downs are not evil by nature, they are merely old. What dwelt there for a while has no claim on the wind forever. Gondolin's beauty was a secret set within stone, a city of 7 names hidden in a mountain-ringed vale where fountains played and white towers lifted their calm faces to the sun. Turgon built it with both craft and caution, and for long years it escaped the net that lay over Beleriand. But love of hidden order can become a kind of stillness that forgets the needs beyond its walls, and pride can open gates even when they seem firmly barred. In the end, betrayal found the concealed path, and fire walked where music had lingered. Yet from that ruin came deeds that would shine far past ash. Glorfindel's stand upon the high pass so that others could flee, and the children who survived to become threads in later tapestries. In some of Tolkien's later writings, Glorfindel is said to have returned in a later age, remade after long sojourn in Mandos, and whether you hold to that note or set it aside, the heart of his story remains the same. Courage given at a narrow place is not extinguished by the place's destruction. It moves forward like a carried flame, small but steady, lighting faces that never saw the hidden city. The 3 kindreds of hobbits, Harfoots, Stoors, and Falahides, began east of the Misty Mountains, and their feet were lighter on the world than most histories mark. Harfoots were the most numerous and most inclined to hills and highlands, quick to find holes and make them home. Stoors loved riverbanks, and some of their line preserved a fondness for boats and the feel of water on the hand. Long after, Gollum's people were said to be of their kin. Falahides were the least in number, taller and more adventurous, and from them came many of the bolder leaders who guided wanderings west. When the hobbits crossed the mountains in slow migrations, they did not rewrite maps with banners. They simply settled kindly valleys, planted, and learned the weathers. In the Shire of later days, these strains mingled until most people gave little thought to origins. Yet you can still see the old threads in small loves. A preference for willow shade, a talent for climbing, a knack for reading a stream. Middle-earth's grand currents are carried by such quiet tributaries. The smallest folk keep much of the world's gentleness in circulation without speeches or trumpets. The sun and the moon are not merely lamps hung in a blank sky. In the elder lore, they were set upon their courses by stewards who understood fire and silver. Arion, a Maya of bright flame, guided the sun with a radiance that did not consume her, while Tilion, a hunter of Orome's train, steered the moon with a wandering heart, drawing near and far in a slow dance that wrote the month upon the world. Their journeys helped close the wound left by the two trees, not replacing their light but giving comfort to eyes that had known a softer shine. That is why moonlight in Tolkien's pages so often feels like a blessing without heat. Why sunlight can be both life-giving and, in rare moments, a little too sharp for those whose first memory is starlight. When a character pauses to watch the moon rise over a dark ridge, there is more in the moment than beauty. There is the knowledge that guidance persists, that even after loss, rhythms can be found, and that the sky keeps promises made in grief. The oath of Sirion and Eorl was spoken upon a green mound with clear wind moving through the grass, and it bound two peoples in friendship that outlasted many other pacts. Gondor, pressed from east and south, gave the wide land of Calenardon to the horse lords who had come to their aid, and in return, the Eotheod swore that they would ride when the beacons called. Rohan's birth was thus not a conquest, but a gift exchanged in peril, and the bond was sealed with simple words remembered longer than some royal names. In later years, when dark sails crowded the Anduin and a white city burned, that promise drew 6,000 riders over leagues of field to the Pelennor at dawn. The great histories often hinge upon such vows, spoken without ceremony in a difficult hour by people who intend to keep them. If you listen closely, you can hear the oaths echo in the thrum of hooves whenever Rohirrim appear in the tale. A harmony between neighbors that does not erase difference but honors it, each strength completing the other's need. Dwarven women are seldom seen by outsiders, not because they are few in courage, but because their people guard privacy as they do gemstones, whose flaws and fires are known only to a master's eye. It is said in the appendices that dwarves are so alike in manner and voice that other races mistake the women for men. And some tales add that beards are not unknown among them, though the dwarves themselves do not rush to confirm or deny such curiosities. What is clear is that their marriages are rare and chosen with great care, and that their hearts are as steady as the ring of a well-set chisel. They travel less often, craft more often, remember most often, and many choose to remain in their halls while their husbands and brothers venture far. This does not make them lesser. It makes the rhythm of their lives different, and in that difference lies much of the durability of their culture. An anvil does not wander, and yet without it no blade would sing true. In dwarven halls, the quiet labor of those who stay is honored with as much respect as the journeys of those who go. Círdan the shipwright stands like a living pier between ages. Older than the moon's first rising and the sun's first dawn, he has watched more departures than any poet could frame. His gift of Narya, the Ring of Fire, to Gandalf when the wizard first came ashore was not an accident of possession but an act of discernment. He knew that Middle-earth would need someone whose hope would warm hearts grown cold and whose courage would kindle without consuming. The ring's power was not to command flame, but to strengthen resolve, to keep despair from extinguishing good work. Círdan himself remained by the keys, shaping keels, listening to tides, offering farewells that were also blessings. In a tale that often follows travelers, he is a marker of place, proof that steadfast presence can be as sacrificial as long roads. When the last white ship slipped its moorings and the gray gulls lifted in its wake, he did not follow immediately. He stayed a while longer for those who might yet arrive, a lighthouse keeper of the elder days, tending a light he would someday entrust to the horizon. Gladr drifts over Minas Tirith in spring when the white tree blooms again, and in that fragrance the city remembers its first planting. The line of the tree goes back to Nimloth in Númenor, and, further still, to Telperian's memory preserved in leaf and light. When the old withered tree was removed, and a sapling found on Mindalluin's slopes, Aragorn did not merely refresh a garden, he rethreaded a lineage through living wood. The people who walked the circles of the city might not speak all the lore, but they felt it in their bones, the quiet pride of a people with roots deeper than ruins. The tree's blossoms are not torches, they are gentle lamps, reminders that renewal arrives softly more often than it arrives in trumpets. In their shade, agreements feel easier, tempers lower, and children look up with the uncomplicated faith that trees always have, that upward is worth pursuing. In a world that has known ash, white petals falling onto white stone are a kind of answered prayer. The Red Book's copies multiplied as the Fourth Age lengthened, and with each hand that transcribed it, small variations crept in like affectionate breaths on a pane. A scribe might expand a genealogy where a local family kept careful notes, or add a stanza to a walking song remembered from an uncle who had a gift for nonsense rhymes. In Minas Tirith, an archivist would pen marginal glosses in Sindarin beside difficult Westron, while in the Shire, a tidy hand would correct a place name to the proper Hobbit usage with gentle firmness. This is not corruption, but life. Stories carried by living communities take on the warmth of fingers, and when the essence remains true, those variations are like flourishes in a familiar melody. Tolkien frames his work as a translation of such a text not to distance himself from it, but to honor the way memory and record interlace. When you read of a feast in the hall at Brandy, you can almost hear the scratch of a quill beside a candle, a soft voice weighing whether to write plenty or more than plenty, and smiling as it chooses the phrase that tastes most like home.